What can you tell us about ISIS, and what are its origins?
Well, actually, there's an interesting article that just appeared a couple of days ago by a highly qualified analyst, Graham Fuller, CIA background, one of the leading intelligence and mainstream analysts of the Middle East. And the title is "The United States Created ISIS." This is one of the conspiracy theories, the thousands of them that go around the Middle East, but this is another source. This is right at the heart of the U.S. establishment. Now, he hastens to point out that he doesn't mean the United States decided to put ISIS into existence and then funded it. His point is, and I think it's accurate, that the United States created the background out of which ISIS grew and developed. Part of it was just the standard sledgehammer approach. Smash up what you don't like. In 2003, the United States and Britain invaded Iraq, major crime. Just this afternoon, the British Parliament granted the government the authority to bomb Iraq again. The invasion was devastating to Iraq. Iraq had already been virtually destroyed, first of all, by the long, decade-long war with Iran, in which, incidentally, Iraq was backed by the United States, and then the decade of sanctions, which were described as genocidal by the respected international diplomats who administered them, and both resigned in protest for that reason. They devastated the civilian society. They strengthened the dictator, compelled the population to rely on him for survival. It's probably the reason he wasn't sent on the path of a whole stream of other dictators who were overthrown. Finally, the U.S. just decided to attack the country. 2003, the attack, it's compared by many Iraqis to the Mongol invasions of 1,000 years earlier. Very destructive, hundreds of thousands of people killed, millions of refugees, millions of other displaced persons, destruction of the archaeological richness and wealth of the country back to Sumeria. And one of the effects of the invasion was immediately to institute sectarian divisions. Part of the brilliance of the invasion force, its director, Paul Bremer, was to separate the sects, Sunni, Shia, Kurds, separate them from one another, set them at each other's throats. Within a couple of years, there was a major sectarian conflict incited by the invasion, very brutal. You can see it if you say, look at Baghdad. If you take a map of Baghdad, say in 2002, it's a mixed city. Sunni and Shia are living in the same neighborhoods. They're intermarried. In fact, sometimes they say they didn't even know who was Sunni, who was Shia. It's like knowing whether your friends are in one Protestant group or another Protestant group. There are differences, but it was not hostile. In fact, for a couple of years, both sides were saying there'll never be Sunni-Shia conflicts. We're too intermingled in the nature of our lives, where we live, and so on. And by 2006, it was a raging war. Out of that conflict then was spread to the whole region. By now, the whole region is being torn apart by Sunni-Shia conflicts. And out of such conflicts, the natural dynamics of a conflict like that, is that the most extreme elements begin to take over. And they had roots. Their roots are in the major U.S. ally, Saudi Arabia. That's been the major U.S. ally in the region as long as the U.S. has been seriously involved there. In fact, since the foundation of the Saudi state. It's kind of a family dictatorship, as you know. And the reason is it has a huge amount of oil. Britain, before the United States, had typically preferred radical Islamism to secular nationalism. And when the U.S. took over, it essentially took the same stand. The radical Islam, which is centered in Saudi Arabia, it's the most extremist radical Islamic state in the world. Makes Iran look like a tolerant modern country by comparison. But and of course the secular parts of the Middle East, of the Arab Middle East, even more so. But it was it's not only directed by an extremist version of Islam, the Wahhabi, Salafi version, but it's also a missionary state. So it uses its huge resources, oil resources, to promulgate these doctrines throughout the region. Establishes schools, mosques, clerics, and so on, all over the place, from Pakistan to Africa, North Africa. And an extremist version of Saudi extremism is the doctrine that was picked up by ISIS. So it grew out of, ideologically, the most extremist form of Islam, the Saudi Wahhabi version, and the conflicts that were engendered by the U.S. sledgehammer that smashed up Iraq and has now spread everywhere. And that's what Fuller means by, and Saudi Arabia not only provides the ideological core that led to the ISIS radical extremism, but it also funds them. Not the Saudi government, but wealthy Saudis, wealthy Kuwaitis, and others provide the funding and the ideological support for these jihadi groups that are springing up all over the place. There are other. This attack on the region by the United States and Britain is the source of where this thing originates. That's what Fuller meant by saying the United States created ISIS. And you can be pretty confident that as conflicts develop, they'll become the more extremist, the more brutal, the harshest groups will take over. That's what happens when violence becomes the means of interaction. It's almost automatic. It's true in neighborhoods. It's true in international affairs. And the dynamics are perfectly evident. And that's what's happening. That's where ISIS comes from. If they manage to destroy ISIS, they'll have something more extreme on their hands.